Hello, I'm Laura Washington, and I'm president of Block Club Chicago, a contributing columnist to the Chicago Tribune and political analyst at ABC7 Chicago. Welcome to Block Club Chicago, the Ballot, and our conversations with the 2023 mayoral candidates. Thanks so much for being with us today, and we are very happy to welcome Mayor Lori Lightfoot. Lori Lightfoot is a former prosecutor and attorney in private practice, and she ran an outsiders campaign in 2019 focused on rooting out corruptions in City Hall. She beat her opponent in a landslide. Mayor Lightfoot has been credited with guiding the city through the COVID-19 pandemic, making advanced payments to the city's pension funds, as well as significant investments on the south and west sides. Her opponents have criticized her combative relationships with other public officials and for the post-pandemic rise in violent crime and CTA service failures. In her 2023 campaign, she is centered around finishing what she started. Welcome, Mayor Lightfoot.
It's a pleasure being on with you.
Thanks for spending the time with us today. It might feel a little bit different because you're not going to have to do those 60-second or 90-second responses. I'll give you a little bit more room.
I appreciate it greatly.
So, now, as I mentioned, your last campaign, you ran as an insurgent. Now you're the incumbent. Mm-hmm. How does that feel? Does that feel differently? And what have you learned in the last 4 years?
Well, of course it feels different because of what we've been through, but it also feels different because of, I think, a great record of accomplishment and delivering on behalf of the people of Chicago. And as these things go, as the incumbent, people aren't going to run against you and give you pats on the back. They're going to run and offer some kind of critique. And I think what people are seeing and why I'm consistently leading in polls is that they recognize that as the incumbent, I do have a record of accomplishment. I don't have to just rely upon value statements and aspirations. I can identify on virtually every topic some concrete, tangible thing that we've done on behalf of the residents of the city, even through the global pandemic, the economic meltdown, social unrest, and so forth. We've continued to work hard, roll up our sleeves, and not been deterred from our North Stars of equity and inclusion and making that real and manifest in the lives of residents all over the city.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned North Star, and one of the things that you pledged to do, and I mentioned this in my intro, is to ferret out corruption, end aldermanic privilege, change the ethical environment at City Hall. Have you succeeded in doing it? I'm sure you're going to say you have, and tell us how.
Look, I think we've taken some big steps forward. Two big things that we did very early on. As you may recall, my first day in office, I signed an executive order ending aldermanic prerogative across agencies in the city. And that was an important step, not only to send a message, but to really free up policymakers, people who were making the decisions about how resources were meted out across city departments, to free them up to do the right thing and not the political thing, and worry about whether or not the mayor was going to have their back when they were competing interests, and perhaps an alderman wanted to go in one direction, but they felt like what was in the best interest of the city was to go in a different direction. So that, I think, was a really big, important statement from day one. The other thing that we got done is there was ethics legislation that many members of the city council wanted to see passed. The former inspector general also wanted to see passed, but had been stalled under the previous administration. We got that done. And it's some of the most far-reaching ethics reform that the city has really seen, not the least of which was giving the inspector general authority to investigate any issues related to aldermen and city council committees. So those are some of the big things that we did. Now, look, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that we've rooted out all the vestiges of the machine. I'm also not going to tell you that one of the next big frontiers is in zoning, which is really also important for us to say, look, aldermen are important. Their voice is very important, but they cannot have unchecked veto power over how development happens or doesn't happen in the city of Chicago. So that's something that I think we're working our way towards. but I feel very good about the things that we've done. The other things that I think are important is we've tried to put more and more city data and be transparent out on the website, from a dashboard that allows residents to see on a daily basis where things stand with public safety in their community, in a zip code, or across the city. That's really historic, and we did that a couple years back. We have put a lot of other data out on websites and portals from various departments so that people don't have to FOIA to get information about how city government is functioning. So that's some of the list, but I feel very good. But look, I will share with you, Laura, I think one of the challenges that remains, and you did read the indictment of Ed Burke, but I suspect others
didn't. To ask you about Ed.
Yeah.
Ed Burke is still sitting in the city council. So in many ways, and you ran against Ed Burke in some of the allegations in 29. So
right.
Have things really changed much? Well,
look, I think that Ed Burke should have resigned when he was indicted. He's obviously chosen not to do that. But the thing that I will say is, if you look at that indictment, there's a little passage that really hasn't gotten much attention, I think, from the media, but was very meaningful to me. And this was, you recall, one of the storylines was he was trying to woo a Burger King operator to get him to give his property tax appeals work to Burke's law firm. And he tried the soft way, took him to the country club and wined and dined him, got nowhere. And then after a period of time where he wasn't able to make progress, he decided, okay, I'm going to change this, and I'm going to try hard power. So he whistled over an inspector from the building department who went to Burke's ward office, stayed there 5 or 10 minutes based upon what the indictment tells us. And then he went over to the Burger King where there was some construction work going on, wrote up a series of tickets and violations, and shut that construction project down. What that means to me is that's where the rubber meets the road. We still have people, unfortunately, in city government. I believe that the vast majority of them are doing their job and doing their job the right way, but we still have people in city government who are still managing under really the old regime, who feel like they've got to go and kiss the ring of the local alderman and don't have any compunction about, frankly, not doing their job ethically or abiding by city rules and regulations. So until we get a sea change in that attitude amongst the people who really are the frontline workers, we know we've got more steps that we need to take to make government really corruption-free. I think that's critically important.
Okay, now you mentioned earlier that you've been doing well in the polls, and there's been a lot of polls in this race, and some of them are not as reliable as others. But one consistent thing that I've seen in the polls is that you've had a pretty high disapproval rating among voters, and that's in stark contrast to the first time you ran, when you won every ward of the city. And part of that disapproval, according to the polling and the commentary, is that you're not getting enough done because basically you're too hard to get along with, that you're too mean. How would you respond to that? And would you do anything different in your second term in terms of how you relate to people?
Well, look, I always have to chuckle a little bit when I see that or hear that. And look, I know as a Black woman, I'm always going to be viewed through a different lens. But the notion that I can't get anything done is ridiculous. You don't close an $838 million budget deficit, the largest in the history of our city, if you can't get things done and you can't collaborate. You don't get the casino done, 30 years in the making, and we got that done on my watch, if you don't know how to collaborate. And frankly, I spent a lot of personal time working the phones, making the meetings with members of the General Assembly and leadership to get that done. Every single time that there's been a challenge that has faced our residents that required us to collaborate and get things done, we've made that. I'll expand it out to something even more recent. For decades, mayors have attempted to get a agreement with the surrounding Chicagoland counties to work together on marketing and business development. No mayor's ever been able to get that done. I got that done. Why were we able to get that done? Because of the personal relationships that I built with people who, frankly, most of whom I didn't know before I became the mayor of the city, but whose we spent a lot of time building trust, building relationships, and that's made an enormous difference in our ability to work together as not just Chicago, acting upon the suburbs, but Chicagoland. I could give you a longer list, but the point is, people may not like my delivery. I don't buy votes. I expect people and elected officials in particular to be the fiduciaries of the they represent, and not just the residents in their ward, but the residents of their whole city. That rubs some people the wrong way. And look, I came into office not coming up through the machine, not being the person that somebody sent, but that's given me the independence that I think is necessary to be able to make the right calls, do the right thing for the right reasons, and not for politically expedient reasons.
Now you mentioned,
going in, you asked the question of going into term 2. I think we built a lot of really strong relationships. I think term 2 gives us the opportunity to deepen those relationships and look for other opportunities to work together really across the board, not only with city council members, with stakeholders in the community organizations, the philanthropic community, and of course the business community.
So deepen those relationships is going to be a goal of, you feel like you've forged them already, you're going to deepen them in the next term.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, look, there's no question whatsoever. 2 years of really every day battling a global pandemic didn't give us a lot of time to be as I think broad and deep as I would have liked in building relationships and introducing myself to people that I may not have known before I took office. We built a lot of really deep relationships with the people who were on the front lines, our hospital systems, a number of different community-based that were advocating on behalf of vulnerable communities. Those relationships are deep and they are strong, and they are inuring to the benefit of our city to this day. Now we've, in the last year, when we're not out of the pandemic, I don't want to suggest that we are, but I've had much more freedom and opportunity to build those relationships in person, build those relationships in other ways. And we're going to continue expanding that outreach to people and important stakeholders across the city.
Now, when I first asked this question about you being mean, you mentioned the fact that you were a Black woman. And this week you were at a debate and you accused Brandon Johnson of mansplaining. And mansplaining, in my definition, is being condescending to a woman, patronizing a woman. And you also accused Paul Ballot of treating you like a child. I know Brandon Johnson is apologized for that. But
yes, he did.
The suggestion is that you're being treated differently because you're a woman, and as mayor, you've been treated differently. And is there a sexist double standard out there in terms of the way you're viewed and treated?
Well, it's not just me. I think any woman who's a leader, and particularly women of color, because we talk about this all the time, knows that there is absolutely a different standard. You know, I've been in the work world almost 40 years. And for much of that time, I've been the only person who looked like me with the same kind of background in many of the rooms that I've been in. And that is difficult and challenging, and particularly when you're dealing with folks who are not used to dealing with women or people of color as peers. But you got to persevere. And I'm a strong believer that you got to play the cards that you're dealt.
Do you think that you're being judged differently than, say, Rahm Emanuel and Mayor Daley because of your sex and race?
Well, look, when somebody says essentially, the mayor's mean, she says mean things. I mean, give me a break. You know, you've been around long enough. You know Rich Daley, you know Rahm Emanuel. Neither of them are going to win Mr. Congeniality contest. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a theme that many have picked up and certainly been propagated by the media. I've not done or said anything any differently than any of my male predecessors, and yet it's a thing. You know, for example, Rahm Emanuel, who I would say was probably both publicly and privately a lot more let's say, challenging in the way in which he approached dealing with people, was lauded as this tough, strong leader. And yet, when a woman exhibits those same kind of qualities, we're shrill and difficult to deal with. Look, it is what it is. I don't let that deter me from making sure that I get done what needs to get done on behalf of the residents of the city.
Speaking of getting things done, I know that Invest Southwest is one of the programs and initiatives you're most proud of, and you talk about it a lot on the campaign trail. Block Club has been covering that issue and that
Yes.
program for a long time, and they're some of the sources that they talk to say that people in the community feel that they were shut out of decision making on some of those projects, even though they had been promised that there would be community engagement, that they would be consulted. And also there's a criticism that much of what you're doing with Invest Southwest you inherited from Rahm Emanuel, or it's stuff that's sort of still breaking ground, is still actually not up and running. Respond to those concerns.
Well, let me take each of them on. On the community end, we spent literally months in each of the 10 communities, visioning, working with, joining tables, and listening to the community who picked the kind of vertical construction, but also the streetscapes, the green spaces that they wanted. I heard from people all over each of these communities that they'd never seen anything like it before. They'd never seen an administration who listens as much, and literally months and months and months of community engagement, both at the very beginning of the process, working with them to identify the areas in the community that they believed could really use an infusion of resources and economic development, listening on what kinds of resources they wanted to see in those communities. And then when there was vertical construction based upon areas of opportunity that the community members had identified, another round of community engagement. And look, this, there are always going to be people that said, my voice wasn't that from my administration, particularly the Department of Planning, Commissioner Maurice Cox, we spent a significant amount of time making sure that the community was heard from and that we were responding to their needs. Many of these communities that we went into had already gone through an extensive community engagement and had quality of life plans that were also the result of extensive, in many instances, years-long consultation with community members. So we feel like
anything you can do to improve on that?
I'm sorry?
Anything you can do to improve on that in terms of reaching for, obviously there's folks out there that feel that they were not included, that there was not enough outreach. You have plans?
Yeah, I mean, look, like I said, I think that we did a really, really extensive survey of making sure that all the stakeholders were involved in the discussions. We obviously work with local elected officials, not just the aldermen, but state reps, state senators. We identified community organizations that were in each of these communities. So I feel like we did a fairly good survey, but obviously there's always opportunity for more engagement, and that work hasn't stopped. We have the signature programs through the infrastructure design and development, through the vertical construction. Now we're in the next phase, which is kind of what we call infill development and investment. So there's going to be always opportunities for people to come to the table and engage. And let me take the second part of your question, which I frankly find not just laughable, but really slightly offensive. The notion that basically what we're doing in Invest Southwest is warmed over hash from the previous administration. That's just nonsense. You listen to people in the community, you listen to the developers and the development teams. They've not seen anything before like this. And I would commend to your attention, there was an op-ed that appeared in the Crusader in the last week or so with a lot of the Black-led development team talking about what a game changer, what a difference this investment is made. There's not been $2.2 billion infused into the South Side and the West Side, certainly not in recent memory, and certainly not during the previous two administrations. This is this is a game changer, and more to come.
Can you give an example? Something that's, I mean, someone you encounter on the street, someone who you've worked with on one of the projects that tells a story about why this is so important for the South and West Sides?
Well, I'll tell you from what I've heard from a couple of the developers. They never got the opportunity to lead these really transformative investments, meaning to be the lead, not a joint venture, not a third or fourth tier subcontractor. And why that makes a big difference is not only are they given the opportunity to be the lead, but they're creating their teams of architects, designers, landscape architects, construction companies who look like them and look like the communities into which they're investing. That's a big deal. And so what that's also done is put them on a different stage. Some of these projects are 30, 40, $50 million projects. That's opened up a whole new array of opportunities for them. Mm-hmm. So that, to me, that's a big part of it. But it's also, we're going into communities, frankly, and this really goes to the first part of your question. Let me take a sip.
Sure.
We're going to communities where there's deep skepticism. Skepticism because these communities have been without for so long. Skepticism because sometimes people come during election year and make all these promises but don't deliver. And so coming in and saying, hey, we're here to help, hasn't always been met with applause all around. But I think where we win hearts and minds is that we show we're there to listen, we're there to be humble, we're there to really help catalyze the dreams and aspirations that a lot of these communities had, but didn't have a champion in the mayor's office to make them happen. That has been, I think, a big game changer. And certainly that's what I've been hearing from people all across these communities that we've been in.
Okay. Let's move to crime, which, as you know, is a really important issue that's getting a lot of conversation on the campaign trail. You say that you're bringing down crime. You say that things are improving. There's a lot of people don't feel that way. One of the questions I hear from everyone is, all your opponents are saying, fire superintendent, fire David Brown. Yeah. Why haven't you fired David Brown? And how are you and David Brown going to turn the crime situation around?
Well, look, I'll say this. I'm not going to be satisfied until Chicago is the safest big city in the country, but safe for a long time, lasting peace. That's what our goal has to be. You know as well as I do that unfortunately crime and violent crime has been a constant in Chicago for as long as most people have memory. And what we've seen is these cycles of spikes. And then historically, what we've done is thrown every bit of law enforcement resources at the problem. And we get a temporary reprieve, and then it builds back up. We use the same strategy. It goes down, and then it builds back up over and over again. What we know, I think, historically is that is a failed strategy. Law enforcement first and only just simply doesn't work. But worse, it delegitimizes the police in the eyes of the communities that need them most, that need to feel like the police are there to help them, to truly serve and protect. But it also sets the police up for failure, not just delegitimize in the eyes of the public, but because we've asked them to take on roles for which they will never be qualified. They're not the parents, the guardians, the school teacher, the counselor, the drug addiction counselor. And yet we've asked them to take on every social ill that's there. So not surprising that it hasn't worked. So to be clear, we absolutely have to do more to take all these illegal guns off the streets. We got to do more to disrupt the pipeline of illegal guns that are coming across the border from states like Indiana. And we've been very aggressive in doing that. Last year, the Chicago Police Department took 12,200 illegal guns off the street. Once again, not only a record for CPD, but double that of New York and LA combined. And we also have been really leaning in to our federal partnerships, particularly with the ATF, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, and the U.S. Attorney's Office to prosecute gun traffickers and hold them accountable. But we've got to do more, and that's why we're also leaning into what I would call our South Power resources. In the summer of 21, we really borrowed 2 pages from COVID-19. We brought everybody together in city government, literally into the same space, who had anything to do with community safety. Of course, police and fire and 911, but also public health, schools, libraries, our infrastructure departments. And we gave them the charge that they must view their work and their mission through a public safety lens. And then we focus like a laser beam on those 15 communities that drove historically 50% of our violence. Now, these are communities, not surprisingly, where there's a high degree of unemployment and poverty, but also a high degree of violence. And we ask those community members, what will it take for you to be safe? Now, it's a different answer in a place like Roseland than it is in South Shore or Inglewood or Austin or North Lawndale. But in every single one of those communities, with the exception of 3, we saw historic declines in violent crime. You know, overall last year, we were down like 14% in homicides, 20% in shootings. But in many of those communities, and the reporting is clear on this, we saw 25, 30, 40, and in some instances, 50% reductions in violent crime. Now, I'm not going to tell you we've arrived at our destination.
I'm sorry, Mayor, but people still don't feel safe. And that
understood. And we have to deal with that perception and reality. Police, we're putting new recruits in areas across the city that need it most, and including on the north side. But yeah, I'm fully aware that we've got more work to do to help people feel safe because they are safe. Not just a gloss, not just a headline, but fundamentally feel safe. And we've got to do, which I've been doing, going into communities that are facing big challenges in public safety or feeling unsafe, and listening to them to say, what do you need? Obviously, everybody asks for more police, not surprisingly. But hey, there's a problem building here. There's a vacant lot. We need more lighting. We'd like some cameras. Those are the kind of things that I think are really important for confidence building measures, so people feel like we are listening and responsive, and that is critically important as well.
And you continue to have confidence in David Brown, and you're going to continue to retain.
Well, look, it's easy for folks who don't know the inner workings of law enforcement or the police department to say, off with his head, right? That's an easy political line. What I'm focused on is what is the degree of accountability? What are the results that we are seeing? Not only in policing, and that's important in law enforcement and safety, what are the results that we're seeing in some of the other big culture change issues that have to happen within the police department, not the least of which is making sure that we continue to see progress meeting our obligations under the consent decree.
I want to move to schools, another obviously very important topic. Chicago public school system is shrinking, as you know. It's lost more than 100,000 students over the last 20 years. It faces a projected, I understand, of as much as $600 million in the next several years. The schools are emptying out. 22 high schools currently have fewer than 250 students, according to reporting by WBEZ, and 95 elementary schools have fewer than 250 students. What is your plan to build up the schools, and what are you going to do about under-enrolled schools and schools that perhaps maybe need to be closed?
Well, look, first and foremost, we have to get more money from Springfield. I think CPS is doing a yeoman's job managing with the resources they have. Obviously, the federal dollars have helped us significantly. We're making investments not only in school curriculum. We are meeting our contractual obligations with the Chicago Teachers Union and the other unions to hire more teachers, to put counselors, nurses, and other support services into schools to help really enhance the learning and deal with the learning loss. But we're also doing things to make sure that there's a baseline of educational resources every school, no matter where you are. And that work really started when CEO Martinez took over. But make no mistake about it, we need to make sure that we get our fair share of dollars from Springfield, which, as you know, from the beginning of time, has always been a consistent problem and concern, really going back to before 1995, when Mayor Daley was able to convince the state legislature to give him control over the school system. We have to continue advocating on behalf of CPS in Springfield. That's mission critical. In addition to that, you raised the question of schools that have significantly small enrollments. I think the way that we have to do it is the way that we're doing it now, not the brutality of the 50 school closure and the process there. That those scars from that process or lack of process are still very, very fresh in people's minds. The way that we have to approach these schools that are under-enrolled is to talk with the teachers, the principals, the parents, and the other stakeholders, the LSCs in each of these schools, and show them the data and have honest conversation about what can be done and then work with them to craft solutions that make sense for those communities. And again, it's not one size fits all. It's not cookie cutter. It's got to be driven by the community because there's such deep mistrust of CPS, but also the process anytime you go into community and you talk about these very sensitive issues. But talk about them you must. That work has already started across our system, again, led by CEO Martinez and his team, led by the local level and the school principals, the LSCs. You've got to build trust. You've got to listen. And that's precisely what is happening.
And speaking of trust, one of the challenges of your administration has been your relationship with the Chicago Teachers Union, which has been challenging. And of course, the Teachers Union is not supporting you in this campaign. Mm-hmm. How would you improve that relationship in your next term? And what steps would you want to take to ensure that we have labor peace, not just with the teachers, but with other unions across the city?
Well, look, what I would say is this, it takes two to tango. And the Chicago Teachers Union believes that it's not just a union. We've got 40 unions across city government. I have very strong and deep relationships with all of them, except the Chicago Teachers Union and the Fraternal Order of Police, which I find to be an interesting thing given where they are on the political spectrum. But fundamentally, I think responsibility for managing that relationship in the first instance, it really lies with the CEO of CPS. And I know that CEO Martinez meets with the president of the CTU on a regular basis. They have a standing monthly meeting. They talk with some frequency in between time. But here's where I'm going to be. I'm always going to be on the side of our students and their parents. And someone who takes that approach and understands in our education system that our students have to come first and that we work out from there. If they're centered on our students and their families, then we will find that common ground. No question whatsoever.
So I have a few issues that are kind of some bread and butter issues that Block Club readers are really interested in. One of them is safe bicycling throughout the city. As you know, there have been a series of tragic accidents in the city in recent years involving bicyclists with cars blocking bike lanes or people being hit in the roadway. What are your plans to improve the bicycle safety infrastructure, and what specifically would you do to make this roadway safer for cyclists and pedestrians?
Well, a couple of things. As you may know, unfortunately, increased speeds throughout cities is a nationwide problem. It's something that I've spoken to Department of Transportation, U.S. Department of Transportation Secretary Buttigieg a lot about, and I'll come back to that in a moment. At the city level, we are looking at opportunities to reduce speed levels in thoroughfares where we see from the data that traffic safety is a real issue. There are some east-west streets, northwest streets, all over the city, but particularly on the south side, where people are driving at extraordinarily dangerous rates of speed. That's very troubling and concerning, not only because of the danger, but when you think about how cars have evolved, say over the last 20 or 30 years, there's been a lot of work done by car manufacturers and their research team to make cars safe for the driver and the passenger, a lot less so in thinking about what safety means for pedestrians who may come into contact with those cars. And what the data tells us is that if you are hit by a car at 40 miles an hour or over, you have basically no chance of survival. And unfortunately, we've seen a number of tragic injuries and deaths resulting from high rates of speed, distracted driving, and other things that have made our thoroughfares, our streets, a lot less safe. So what are we specifically doing to address that? As I said, one of the considerations that we have under review is reducing speeds limits across our city. You may recall that back in the summer and fall, I fought hard against an effort by some in city council to actually increase speeds around parks and schools, going completely in the wrong direction, no pun intended, given what we're seeing as traffic fatalities in our city. We are putting in a number of not just designated bike lanes, although we're doing that, we're expanding the number of bike lanes exponentially across the city. But what we're also doing is putting in the protected bike lanes. That is the concrete barriers that make it difficult or impossible for motor vehicles to cross into the. And that, I think, is absolutely critical to make sure that we are supporting and protecting bicyclists. We're also obviously advocating for other kinds of alternative forms of transportation beyond using cars. Obviously, public transportation, but also we put in bikes in areas of our city that have historically not had access to these alternative modes of transportation. But fundamentally, we have got to push the federal government and the Department of Transportation to really push the car manufacturers to think about pedestrian safety also as they're designing vehicles of the future.
And there's also an issue of safety on public transportation. You just mentioned public
Yes.
transportation a minute ago on the CTA. And the CTA is coming back. I ride it every day, but there's still a lot of concerns about personal safety. There's concerns about the cleanliness. There's concerns about the reliability. What is your bottom line on the CTA? What are you going to be able to do? What do you plan to do in the next 6 months to turn around the CTA?
Well, look, I think we have started to see some turnaround, but not fast enough and not deep enough. And I'm pushing President Carter, I'm pushing his leadership team to do a couple of things. Number one, we spent a lot of time talking to the unions that are responsible for the members on the bus side, but also on the rail side. Those have been very, very fruitful conversations because fundamentally, if those workers don't feel safe, they're not coming to work. And that's mission critical. We've got to make sure that we're listening to them, what their specific safety needs are. And frankly, they make a lot of common sense. They've given a lot of great suggestions. And one of which, not surprisingly, is they really want to see uniformed police officers in the train stations, on the platforms, in the trains. And they want to make sure that we are getting back to having local districts engaging with the bus operators, particularly on those high traffic lines, and we are doing that. We put more uniformed police officers on the CTA, and we started to see a reduction in violent crime. I'm not going to tell you again that we've solved every problem, but we're pleased with the progress that we've made, but we're holding ourselves accountable to do more. One of the other challenges that we see, obviously, is with the number of homeless and folks who clearly have mental health challenges on our public transportation system. Much more complicated to deal with. Obviously, those folks all have rights. We work with skilled teams, experts in homelessness, experts in mental health challenges, to really try to engage with these folks and bring them into a place that's not living on a train car, but into supportive housing and transitioning. Again, more work to do there, but we recognize the challenge that's there. But bottom line is the CTA must be safe. It must be readily available, and it must be on time and available for people who are depending upon it. One of the biggest challenges that the CTA has faced on the latter issue is staffing. The CTA has not been immune like other industries or businesses across our country and across our city that has really been challenged getting workers on the job. I will tell you, it's a great paying job, great benefits, very strong unions. The CTA is working hand in glove with the ATU locals to hold job fairs. We're advertising it. I'm promoting it on my various social media accounts. I urge Block Club to do the same. But also fundamentally, because of these staffing shortages, the thing that I've said to President Carter is you can't just put out a rider alert. You've got to be much more proactive in engaging with the riding public to let them know what the challenges are. But when the schedule is going to change, you've got to be proactive and let people know about that. No one needs to be standing out on the street thinking a bus is coming and then it never shows up. Nobody needs to be sitting in a train station waiting for a train that never shows up. That's not right. That's not fair. And you can easily change that and address it by better communication.
Right. Well, better communication and technology. And in the Ghost, I have to tell you, as a rider, the Ghost bus problem is still a big one. And the CTA claims that they are addressing, but it's getting a little bit better, but I think they have a long way to go.
Well, I appreciate the feedback, and I will keep applying the pressure because people need to be able to rely upon public transportation. You know this. A lot of people in our city don't have cars. Public transportation is the primary means of transit for them to get to work, to get to church, to get to doctor's appointments, and it's got to be reliable, period.
And there are people that don't have choices. They have no choice but to take the CTA, so they deserve the best. Okay, I have a couple more reader questions I want to get to. One is from Katie Fight, who wants to know how you are going to address the quality and inequities of programming in the park system. How will you lever the Chicago park district to engage more children and be very genuine resources for the communities they are located in?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question. And I think part of it, frankly, is making sure that the park district isn't isolated in the work that it's doing. I mentioned before when we were talking about public safety that a lot of the work that we're doing is breaking down those silos and looking for opportunities for connection and partnership between, for example, the park district, the libraries, and local schools, local community organizations. One of the things that I'm proudest of that we got accomplished a year ago is the My Shy, My Future app. And if you don't know about it, I encourage all your listeners to go to the Google store or whatever their app store is and look for My Shy, My Future and download it. I'm told that we're the first city in the country to have an app. And the app is important because we want to make sure that this is something readily available and accessible to young people that they can find all across the city, 7 days a week, opportunities for productive, safe engagement. Everything from making beats, photography, music opportunities, knitting, sewing, swimming, you name it. We want to make sure that there's never an opportunity or never a time when our young people in particular don't have safe, productive opportunities to engage in 7 days a week, and particularly in their out of school time. What you'll also find on that app is opportunities for employment for our young people. We are encouraging social services organizations to sign up on the app so they also are building out this network across the city of opportunities, programming for young people and their families to know about. And the app allows young people to not only access the information, but to share what they're engaged in with their peers. So that is one of the things, in the Park District is a big, big part of our umbrella of My Shy, My Future activities for young people in the city. And of course, we made significant investments. Part of our $1.2 billion of investments, there's a significant chunk of it that is focused on supporting young people and their families. So we've got a lot of things, I think, that are going in the right direction. Obviously, more work that we can do. And we're working with the Park District that's had some staffing challenges to make sure that they are rising to the occasion and meeting the needs of people who really love and rely upon our parks for their leisure and other entertainment.
And the parks are really a lifeline for young people in the city, and one of several ways to keep young people safe and engage them. So
yeah, I mean, there are parks all across our city where generations of kids in the same family, same family network, they consider themselves ex-park kids, right? They go to the parks for programming when they're young, then they graduate and they're park counselors, and then they come back after they graduate from college and work full time in those parks. That to me is really the essence and the beauty of our park system. So it's critically important that we make sure that our park system flourishes.
Do you have a favorite park? Is it a park you enjoy?
Well, I have to tell you I think one of the under-resourced and absolutely beautiful parks in our city is Columbus Park on the far west side. It is an extraordinary park. And it's got many, many offerings. And I frankly just like walking around because it's so incredibly beautiful, quiet. And frankly, I can go there. People don't know I'm there. But I love Columbus Park.
And now we know where to find you, Mayor.
I've given away my secret.
So another question from the community, and this comes from Rage Inglewood. And they're asking about, particularly in Inglewood, they say that they have over 600 abandoned and vacant residential and commercial properties. Yeah. They want to know what you're going to do to address the hyper vacancies of vacant properties in places like Inglewood and other neighborhoods in the city.
Well, Inglewood is absolutely a big area of focus for us. We've invested a lot with the stakeholders there. And as you know, there's a number of great organizations in Inglewood that are doing amazing things to kind of turn around the fortunes of Inglewood. One thing that I will mention when we talk about vacant lots, we lobbied for and got a $20 million grant from the federal government to build out the Inglewood Trail. And that's as a result of a lot of work of many folks there in Inglewood, but this is going to be a game changer for that community. So it's taking abandoned railroad tracks, so I think it's about 2 miles, maybe a little bit longer than that, and building out, it's already very lush and green, very different than the 606 on the north side, but it's going to connect up this Inglewood Trail with a lot of the urban ag activities that are going on in Inglewood. And our commitment is looking on either side of that trail in the vacant lots, many of which are city-owned lots. We see those as real opportunities to create retail and housing. One of the other things that we've done, and this was announced last year, excuse me, is we put up a little over 2,000 vacant lots and made them available for people to purchase. We had a lot of heavy community engagement, put these online, pictures of the various lots, and that is going quite well. Overall, we've got about 10,000 lots that are owned by the city alone. Then you've got to account for the land bank. And so our goal is to convert those into usable space, whether it's new housing, single family homes, whether it's community lots or green spaces. We invested $87 million of our $1.2 billion to do a great survey of all the available vacant lots that are in the custody control of the city. And we are starting the process, as I mentioned, of turning those over to members of the public so that they can make them into usable and productive space.
Well, and you said there's 10,000 lots in that category. So you have a plan to turn these over. Do you have a time frame for that? That's a lot of property. Do you have a timetable? Do you have a
well, we started the process late last year to look at a group of these lots that we believe we're ready to turn over to members of the public. We're going through the various applications. Now, this is a project that was run by the Department of Planning. And then we're looking at other opportunities where we can do, again, more community-based driven development and clustering some of these vacant lots. But Inglewood is a community where there's a significant amount of vacant lots. Lots of people in that community have very good and interesting ideas of how to convert those into something that's productive use. Again, not surprisingly, single family homes, affordable housing, businesses, retail. So I think the sky's the limit. And our job is to make sure that we understand what opportunities are there. And then we give the community the resources they need to do the visioning exercise. Well, how can we turn these couple lots into something that is really productive for the community? It's got to be community driven. This can't be something where we come from the 5th floor and say, here's what's best for community. So that will take some time, but I think the time is going to move as fast as the community believes is necessary.
We're talking months, years before you do.
Well, I certainly hope not years, but we're active and engaged in these communities that have really the high concentrations of the vacant lots, Inglewood being one of them, and engaging with local stakeholders to meet with them and talk to them about how they want to see these city-owned lots utilized.
Okay, I just want to get to as much as I can. I just have a couple more questions,
Sure.
from readers. People are really interested in knowing what your view is on the environment, on climate change. There are some people that believe that the city should have a commissioner level Department of Environment. What is your position on that issue, and what is your plan for addressing environmental issues in your next?
Well, first and foremost, part of our $1.2 billion was a $188 million commitment to the environment. When I came into office, because the Department of Environment had been disbanded some years before, it wasn't just that functions related to the environment were spread amongst too many, in my view, city departments. We were also not claiming our role as an environmental leader across the Midwest and the Great Lakes in particular. So one of the first things we did is rejoin a lot of different organizations that are very much focused on the Great Lakes and environmental justice issues across our region and certainly across our state. So that was issue one. I thought that was important for us to reassert ourselves as a leader. In addition to that, we've looked at some of the policies that we felt were needed to really move forward on climate change in particular, and in looking at communities that were overburdened by the effects of legacy brownfields and other industrial issues. So through the work of our team in the mayor's office, the Office of Climate Equity, which we set up, we've been doing a number of things. Number one, we passed, I think, the most far-reaching air quality control organization for new industrial development. We've added through our budgets more air filters, more opportunities for us to really real-time gauge what's happening in terms of air quality in our city. We've been working diligently with the U.S. Department of Environmental Protection on a climate impact and effects piece of legislation and policy, which should be done the second quarter of this year. In addition to that, one of the things, frankly, that I care a lot about is there are too many areas of our city, particularly on the west side, where there are no green space. Mm-hmm. That's problematic for a whole host of reasons that you obviously understand. We've got to have, the data is very clear. Where there are green spaces, it reduces crime. Where there are green spaces, it has an effect on mental health and trauma. So we have committed to planting 75,000 new trees. We started that in 2022. We actually exceeded our goal of 15,000 each year. We got closer to 20,000 last year. That's being led by CDOT, by Streets and Sand. We've instituted a Green Corps, job opportunities for young people, again, working on environmental justice and other climate-related issues in their community. We have tree ambassadors who are really being the stewards of trees in neighborhoods. In addition to that, one of the other big things that we did and were able to accomplish last year is starting in 2030, as part of our climate action plan, 70% of the energy needs for the city of Chicago government is going to be through renewable resources. We signed a contract with a company that's building a big solar farm down in Champaign County. So that's outside of Springfield. We're their largest customer. The second largest customer is State Farm. But think about the fact that by 2030, 100% of our energy needs, whether it's at our airports, whether it's at our libraries, or other city buildings, is going to be fueled by not carbon emitting fuel, but by clean energy. And whether it's solar, or we're going to go into the market and purchase the other 30% using renewable credits. That's a big, big deal. One of the biggest deals in the country. And we're very proud of that work. Those are some of the things that we're doing to address climate action and climate change.
What about a Department of the Environment?
Oh, yes. I supported the Department of Environment. We agreed as part of this year's budget that we would contract with a consulting agency to really do a survey across the country to look at what the best practices are, look at what the staffing needs are, help us develop a specific mission statement for Department of Environment. And it's our goal to make that proposal as part of the FY24 budget. So we've given ourselves a deadline of June to get that research information done. And then, as I said, we'll be folding it into our budget proposal for FY24.
And you will be proposing it as a full, you have to do more research on what it actually looks like, but it'll be a full-blown cabinet level Department of Environment.
Yeah, I mean, it's been, I think, close to a decade since the Department of Environment existed. A lot has happened in the world of environmental policy. We want to make sure that we're building a department not just for today, but really for the future. What's the right staffing levels? What's the mission? What are the opportunities, not just for funding from the city government, but grant opportunities? What's the right staffing and the right level of expertise that we need to be able to build that Department of Environment? There were some that said, just call it a department now. And I said, no, that's the wrong thing to do. If we're going to call it, if we're going to build a department, we want to set it up for success, not failure. And having a title without the right scope, without the right level of expertise, that to me was bad governing. Okay.
All right. As we wrap things up, I want to come back to some breaking news from this week. And it gets back to the issue of policing. As you know, there's been the national conversation we've been having forever about police accountability and reform has been renewed with the terrible case of Tyree Nichols. And this week, the Tribe reported that the son of one of your opponents, Gus Vallis, was one of 3 police officers in San Antonio who shot a black man who was running from the police in 2022. Paul Vallis says that the shooting was investigated, that his son properly followed policy and practice, and that he's been reinstated in the police department in San Antonio. What's your reaction to this, and should voters care about this?
Well, look, I will leave it to the voters to decide whether or not this is something that's important. First and foremost, I don't think it's appropriate to comment about the child of another candidate. I just think off limits. And frankly, what I know really,
even adult children who were, okay.
I really do. I mean, look, if that adult child puts himself in the middle of a campaign, maybe that's a different issue. But I've not seen any evidence or indication of that. I think, look, the 2 other issues that I would say, as you know, I've investigated probably more police-involved shootings than most people in the country, given the various roles that I've been in over the course of my career. I can't sit here from a distance and judge what happened. But thinking about, for example, what happened in Memphis, I do have a lot of questions there. And first and foremost, it's around what was the training? Where were the supervisors? If you look at those videos, which frankly, I don't encourage people to do because they're pretty horrific. But what ran through my mind among a number of thoughts is, where's the white shirts? Where's the supervisors? They had a lot of contact with Mr. Nichols over 2 different scenes, and you never saw anybody in a white shirt. That's a fundamental problem. What was the training of these officers? What was being done to make sure that they were being held accountable? We don't have answers, frankly, to any of those things. And frankly, they're before the grace of God. And I will tell you, one thing that our department has been doing is going to, led by Superintendent Brown and his senior leadership team, going to roll calls, going to tactical teams and other folks that are in plain clothes and showing them the videos and really, I think, telling them, hey, you can't be that guy or girl. You need to make sure that you're abiding by the rules. And hey, supervisors, we're going to hold you accountable and make sure that the people that are under your supervision, that you are doing everything possible to make sure that they're engaged in constitutional policing, that they're not using excessive force. So that has been, I think, an important opportunity for learning with people in our own department. And look, Laura, there's plenty of things to say about Paul Vallis, the candidate. Not the least of which is his disturbing tendency to align himself with the far right fringes of the Republican Party. It's not just that he's a Republican. He said he would run like a Republican, and certainly is, but the company he keeps is extraordinarily concerning. John Cantazzara, the head of the FOP, Awake Illinois, which I can't think of in some ways a worse organization that not only are science deniers, but also talk about the members of the LGBTQ plus community as if we're all pedophiles and groomers of young children. Those are some of the people that he's chosen to associate himself with. Darren Bailey. The list is long, and it's disturbing.
And what does it say to you? I mean, what does that say to you about Paul Vallis, the candidate?
Well, look, what I've seen of him is, frankly, a very different person than what I thought I knew from 4 years ago. Although now we see these videos of him from 2019 saying, you know, I'm a Republican, I'm going to run as a Republican. We know that he's not pro-choice.
I think those are from 2009, I believe, the video.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah.
If I misspoke, I said 2009. The fact that he said he would pick Rudy Giuliani when Barack Obama was the president. He is doing everything that he can to pander to a certain crowd to make sure that the people that are writing him 6-figure checks keep doing so. But his views are so out of touch with the mainstream of Chicago. And that's before we even get to his record of, frankly, failure, not only as a budget director, not only at CPS, but in New Orleans, where he basically gutted the public schools and fully privatized them, what he did in Philadelphia, way before we even get to his record. And this notion that he is the great savior that's going to keep people safe, and he touts his time as budget director. Well, the murders in the 3 years that he was budget director started at 851 and went up to 940, far worse than what they are now. So this airbrush of who he is, how he's running, I think should give voters great pause.
And you said you would really love to be his opponent in the runoff. Why is that?
Well, I think I said I would like him as my opponent in the runoff.
Okay.
And I think it's for these reasons, because his views and who he is and the people that he associates with are out of the mainstream of who we are as a city. Of course, we have Republicans here. That's not the point. But the Republicans that I know are not of the far right-wing fringe who believe that they've got the answer and that everybody else is an enemy of the state. The people that I know are not demonizing people for who they love and living their authentic life. The people that I know respect a woman's right to choose and bodily autonomy. So those are some very fundamental precepts that I think the heartland of voters in our city say are sacrosanct. And yet Paul Vallis is trying to pretend that he's something that he's not, while associating with these very extreme right-wing people and organizations.
Okay. Well,
so
we're going
the
to have
contrast couldn't be more different.
We're going to have Paul Vallis on next week, so we'll give him an opportunity to respond to that. And so I want to wrap this up, Mayor. I really appreciate you giving us so much time, but I have to ask you the most important Chicago question of the day. And we're in the middle of winter, and we're probably going to get some more snow before we're out of it. And you know about the time-honored practice of dibs in Chicago. Are you pro dibs or anti dibs?
No, I'm kind of anti-dibs. Here's what I think. I think that everybody needs to shovel their walks. I think that's critically important. And I appreciate that when somebody takes the time in the middle of winter, when the snow is falling, and digs their car out. Look, obviously, it's a funny and amusing practice here in Chicago. But I think the bottom line is we got to make sure that we're working together, not just for ourselves. You know, you think, Laura, about what we've been through over these last 4 years, really unprecedented times. There are plenty of opportunities for us to really be sad and despairing. But thing that I've seen over and over again, even in some of the toughest circumstances, is a love of city, a love of neighborhood, a love of who we are as Chicagoans. And that's really, to me, that resiliency and that hope and optimism, even in the most bleak circumstances, that's what's gotten us through. And, you know, I know your question was intended to be funny about dibs, but I think remembering that, as the great poet Gwendolyn Brooks said, we are each other's business. That's really what makes, I think, it sets Chicago apart. Whether we live in the far north side, far south side, southeast, southwest, or west side, we got to be in this fight together. And I think for the most part, we are, and that's what's going to carry us through.
We're still standing and we're still moving ahead. And I really appreciate your giving us this time today. Mayor Lori Lightfoot, see you out there on the campaign trail, and thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Laura. Appreciate it.
And thanks to all of you for joining us for Block Club Live, The Ballot. Please stay tuned for our next show with Congressman Jesus Chuy Garcia tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. Check out our website, blockclubchicago.org, for our entire schedule. See you then, and thanks for watching.